listening to the Deltek Podcast, the show for leaders in project-driven industries where the stakes are always high and the margin for error is zero. In every episode, we bring you the data, the experts, and the insights that help you lead with speed, clarity, and control. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome. I'm Katja Obstgarten, and today I'm joined by Megan Miller, Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Deltek. Megan spends her time closely tracking the forces shaping the architecture and engineering industry, from shifting market conditions to evolving workforce dynamics, and how firms can turn those insights into smarter strategy and stronger positioning. In today's podcast episode, we're talking about designing for tomorrow and how A&E leaders embrace change and what it takes to lead through a moment that's anything but predictable. We'll also dig into how the industry is evolving through consolidation, shifting demand, and new business models, and what that means for how firms design their strategy moving forward. But Megan, before we get started, can you introduce yourself and the perspective you bring to working so closely with A&E firms?
Sure. Thanks so much, Katja. I'm so glad to be here. And, I've been a part of this industry for a very long time. So not only being here at Deltek and working closely with our customers in the industry, but also prior to that, actually working for architecture and engineering firms. And so my heart is there. My passion is there of just being able to see how do we help these firms be successful? How do we help them to take that next step and be able to evolve their business? Now as a part of Deltek through the technology side, but what are the challenges that they're facing and what are the obstacles that are in their way and the big opportunities as well? And so it's really a key part of what I do here and something that I just get excited about and really stay connected to this industry that's so vital to everything that we do every single day. There's no place that we can look that this industry is not impacting.
Absolutely. And I think you bring such a unique perspective having been in our customer shoes before.
Right.
So that's awesome. Before we get in, why don't we level set a little bit? Can you give some perspective on how top performing firms designing for the future could potentially position themselves, despite some of the hesitations they might be feeling with what's going on in the market?
Yeah, so I think if you look at a lot of what's happening, right, for the last 10 years that we've been talking about different benchmarks and metrics, we're always saying firms need to be planning for change. We need to be planning for change. And that's really just becoming part of the norm, that change is constant. Change is always happening, especially in this industry. And if we look at the things that were facing firms even 5 years ago, very different dynamics than what we have today, and will continue to change at such a fast pace. So if we look at some of those companies and what they're embracing, it's really looking at data, looking at technology, looking at how it can be more efficient and effective.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really seeing that firms are taking a hold in that and really trying to be more focused and more intentional in how they use that information and not just collecting data for the sake of having data.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, what distinguishes those firms, to keep those momentums from those firms that get stuck? So maybe they know about these things, but they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. So if we look back at the data side of it, right, and we look at what firms are really trying to do, historically, we've always looked backwards. We're looking at what's already happened. We're looking at where things were last year or the previous year with a particular client or a market. But now those firms that are really excelling, they're starting to spend more time looking forward. They're looking for that predictive information. They're looking for using that past information to inform future decisions, which is really important in distinguishing yourself in the market. Because if you're just continuing to do what you've always done, then that's where some of those firms are going to get left behind. So some of those firms that are staying ahead, they're taking advantage of the technology. They're taking advantage of the data they have, that they have people who are really focused on what's coming and how do we plan for it and not waiting for it to get here and then trying to figure out
Right.
now what do we do that this dynamic is at play. So I think they're getting much more deliberate and intentional about how they're running their business rather than just focusing on delivering projects, which is super important, but isn't the whole story.
Right. No, there's a lot that goes into that for sure. Even with the current economic conditions, firms are still doing some hiring, and leaders must design a workforce strategy that accounts for shortages in the talent market and the departure of institutional knowledge. So as some of these folks start to retire, how should leaders balance hiring versus upskilling right now?
So I think the key in that, Katya, is really the balance. And it's never going to be an either or. It's always going to have to be a both. And while we're seeing that growth within firms is slowing down quite a bit, there's still growth there. And there's always going to be people that are leaving. They're looking for different opportunities. That turnover and attrition So firms have to really focus on how do we bring in the right people? And then once we have them here, how do we keep them there? The upskilling is a key part of that. But another key aspect of that is being able to help them see their future in the firm and being able to see where they can go, where they can grow, where they can develop. And we're starting to see some of those firms that are at least having plans for investing more in training, investing more in their employees in a very intentional way, spending more time in career development, spending more time in having those plans for their, where are they going to go that is not just for what the firm wants, but what the employee wants as well. Not everybody maybe wants to be a project manager. So how do you take those really skilled engineers and architects and what does their career path look like and how does that fit into the whole puzzle? So I think as we look at that upskilling piece of it, it's really key that that's not only a priority, but we're also hearing from firms that we need to make sure they have the time for it. So when we're looking at project managers who are juggling so much already, they have so many things on their plate. How do we make time for them to improve their technical skills, improve their soft skills, think about future growth and leadership? And there's a lot that comes into that. If we're still expecting them to be very billable, highly utilized, there's a conflict there that firms really have to be thinking about. And that's going to help separate them when they're in that hiring to be able to be a more attractive opportunity for some of these candidates.
We're asking folks to do more with less resources, and it applies to the employees as well. We want them to succeed and they want to succeed. So therefore, giving them the tools to do that.
And making sure that there's also time for them to learn those tools and figure out how to use them. If you think of when everybody started to use Copilot, the first question that everybody asks is, this is great, but what do I do with it?
Right.
I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to prompt. We're getting better at that now, but that type of training, it can't just be, here's the tool, but helping those teams learn, how do I do this? How does this make me more efficient? How does this make me more effective? And also being cognizant that while we're trying to make sure that we are doing more with fewer people, we don't want to burn out the teams. We have to have that balance. We have to have the investment in their future so that they don't feel like they're just here to deliver as much as they can and they're working crazy hours. And, that's not as much of the culture in some of the younger generation that has been historically, specifically in this industry. And I think part of what you asked about too is in terms of capturing some of that senior leadership and their knowledge and
they're not used to the whole technology thing.
Right. But I think they have so much to offer in terms of their technical knowledge, their soft skills, their relationships with clients. And how do you capture that appropriately so that they're being seen as the experts? They don't necessarily see themselves as that internally, but if you can help to say, hey, we'd love for you to do something to train some of our teams on this topic, then they can get behind that. If you're asking them to come up with what could you train people on? They're like, that's not me. I don't want to be a part of that. But being very deliberate about that knowledge transfer is going to be really important because a lot of that institutional knowledge, as you said, is going to be walking out the door. And how do you capture that really before it's gone?
For sure. I think we could probably say that's happening in a lot of different industries.
Yes.
And just given the rate of change across the board, how business is done, it's kind of a scary thought.
I think, even now when there's a lot more turnover and there's a lot more transition between firms, that knowledge is moving from firm to firm and people aren't starting out their career at one firm in engineering and staying there until they retire. So how do you plan for that and how do you capture some of that along the way is definitely a challenge that firms haven't quite solved for yet. And it's still something that, we're still trying to figure out how do we capture some of that goodness and not lose it as people look for other opportunities because that's the reality of what we're dealing with now in this industry.
Speaking of project managers, their roles, like you said, are expanding super fast. And, there are more tools than ever that can help support, what they need to do. What should firms be prioritizing for this next generation? What types of tools will really help them be successful?
So I think it's really a good opportunity to have a conversation with the project managers. So what are the things that they are feeling the most stress about? What are the things that are overwhelming them the most? And in some cases, what you'll find is the tools are already there. They just may need help learning how to use them better. So when we look at, we talk to some of our customers about managing projects and their resources and they have tools to do that. They have resource management capabilities, but the PMs aren't using it. So then it's diving into Why are we not using that? What's the blocker? What do you need to get over that hump to be able to really start using it? One of the other things is, really embracing different technologies. I know there's a lot of conversation around AI and where that comes in, but it's being able to introduce it in, again, that deliberate and intentional way that I mentioned before. It's not just for the sake of using AI, but what can it help me do? What is it that it will make me more efficient, will make me more productive? What is it going to take off of my plate for me that will allow me to focus on something else? So in any of those tools, whether it's better project management, better fee estimates, better resource plans, how can you use the tool to be more efficient and effective and to share across the business so that we're not just doing things in spreadsheets that only I can see, but now I can see what you're planning for. You can see what I need, and our resources can really be leveraged in the best way. And I think for those project managers, one of the challenges too is they're facing a lot of different dynamics that they didn't have, again, 5 or 10 years ago, right? So nobody comes out of engineering or architectural school and has the skills to be a project manager. They're learning it along the way. But what those skills are that they need are constantly changing. So not only do they have to be able to have conversations with clients, they have to be able to do fee estimates. Now they have to understand the different requirements of what they can and can't do with AI on a project because a client may not allow that to happen. So how do they keep track of all of that? And the soft skills that they need, the resources that they need are constantly changing. And it's hard for them to really keep up with that pace of change across the business.
Yeah. I think if there's one constant, it's change.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's shift gears a little bit. If we talk about like operational resilience within the industry, what does that look like to you?
So I think there's a lot of opportunity for, kind of going back to the basics in some of this of where are there opportunities for more efficiency? Where are there processes that we're just not as efficient as we could be? We have, in some cases, the tools available, but we're not using them. So, again, we talk to customers that when we talk to them about what they're using in their ERP or in their system, they're using a small portion of what's there from an automation, from an AI perspective, from a workflows perspective that really can help them to not just be more efficient for the sake of efficiency, but ultimately that's going to help their bottom line. And as we're seeing tighter and tighter margins on projects, we're seeing more and more challenges to resource those projects. Having that visibility, having that automation, having those pieces in place are really going to help firms to have that operational efficiency that you mentioned. Part of that is really going back to, when I say back to the basics, it's looking at what are the processes that they have today and where are the biggest pain points. So if I ask a project manager, what gets in your way of doing your job? If I ask an accountant, what gets in your way of doing your job? What are the most manual, the most painful, the most challenging steps in your process? If you ask those questions, you'll probably get some pretty clear answers. Some of it might be visibility. Some of it might be manual tasks. Some of it might be, there's a variety of things that
And they'll be very different
into that. And it could be very
based on the
different.
role. Yeah.
And it could be very different for two different people in the same role. This project manager may have very different challenges. So you can't talk to one and then just kind of assume that that applies across the board. But I do think that, looking at some of those pressures that they're facing, helping them to see where they can take advantage of the tools again, take advantage of those resources and be able to have those really come to the bottom line. Again, like how do we use this in a way that's going to help your project be more profitable? It's going to help the business be more profitable. That's going to help us save time that turns into money. So if that's the mindset, then it helps people to think about where are those steps today. So one of the things that we've talked about in the past, of just as an example, is if you think about an hour that's charged to a project and you follow that all the way through the actual collection in terms of the dollar, what happens in that process? And where are there internal problems that, like, if you're still, for example, printing out your reports and putting them on a project manager's desk and hoping they find them in the stack of everything else, waiting for the markups, doing the markups. So there's a lot of places where that automation, those tools can help with that. That's just one example. There's also the external side of that. How do we help firms or help our clients to be able to pay faster, to be able to get the right invoices, to be able to get what they expect? Something that simple, you could come up with a lot of opportunity for efficiency And that's just one area of the business. So having those conversations can really help not only for efficiency, but help you to be more resilient as client demands change, project requirements change, teams internally, as you mentioned, change. How do we make it so that we are as efficient as possible to weather some of that uncertainty?
Absolutely. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, but are there any particular operational changes that might deliver the biggest impact? Maybe even for like small business, maybe who's starting out, who might need that little extra push just to get started, or even larger firms that maybe they haven't considered.
I think for a lot of it, again, it goes back to using, in some cases, what you have. So if you're still doing things in spreadsheets, if you're still doing things in a manual way, you have to have that process built for how you work. So if it's not a project-based business, if it's or not project-based tool, what are the things that you could be doing to help in that process and using the tools the way that they were designed? So looking at, if you're using it the same way you were using that tool 5 years ago, every one of those tools have had incredible enhancements from an AI perspective, from an automation perspective that take advantage of those. Spend some time figuring out where those enhancements are and how you can roll them out effectively to your teams. I think for small businesses in particular, they don't have people that are able to spend the time digging through all of those. So maybe it's bringing in a consultant to help you to map through your process and say, where can we optimize this? Where can we improve this? Where are we struggling the most? And then taking advantage of those AI tools, especially those built into your systems. Where can those really help you? And have those trusted partners that that data is protected, it's reliable, and it's helping your teams to really be more efficient.
Makes total sense. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, industry shifts and as the industry is reshaping itself, as you said, through consolidation, new business models, and so on, leaders have to design their strategy going forward with these dynamics in mind. How should firms adapt strategically in the face of ongoing consolidation?
Yeah, so if you look at the consolidation, there's really been record numbers of mergers and acquisitions just in the last year, and that number just continues to rise. And we expect that maybe it will come down a little bit. It may not be quite at that level, but it's a big conversation in the industry. And whether it's through acquisition or it's through firm leadership transition or just goals of growth, I think as firms are looking for what do they need to do next, it's making sure that all parts of the business are a part of that conversation. That it can't just be, we've acquired this firm and go, but the systems that need to be used, the engagement of the employees that need to be taken into consideration. How do we fold them in and make them feel a part of this company? How do we get the right tools in their hands so that everybody is using the same? So there are some firms out there that have created some incredible processes for this and incredible efficiencies around this because they're doing this multiple times a year. Some of them 10, 15 times a year through acquisitions. So they've got playbooks for this of how do we do this effectively? And you may not be able to do a full playbook for it, but thinking about those downstream impacts, those downstream teams that are going to feel, if not the complete change around this, there's going to be ripples. And so where are those ripples? How do you make sure that everybody's pretty much aligned? Maybe not day one, but as soon as you can, that you're not waiting, months and years to try to fold those in to really feel part of the whole. That's really where some of that success is going to come.
Understood. Before we kind of transition to our next question, are there anything that like leaders should first invest in? Because obviously when you're going through an acquisition, everything feels urgent. I mean, it's all about timing, right? So like, are there any specific, pieces of advice or guidance you can give to leaders, around that?
So I think a lot of that comes back to what are the goals of that either acquisition or what if you have a list of all those things that are urgent, how does that align to your company strategy or your business strategy for the year? That can help you to kind of sort through those a little bit and figure out the best way to bring forward the things that you need to. But I think one of the things that helps in that prioritization is to think about where is the biggest impact? Where is, we talk about that here, right? We talk about where is that investment going to produce the greatest results?
Absolutely.
That might be in the people, that might be getting them up to speed quickly and on the right systems and being more efficient and better ingrained into the teams. Or it might be letting them operate in the way that they do today and dealing with some other things first that are more urgent and can have a greater return, while that company that you acquired kind of sits on the side, right? And we've done that at Deltek too. As we go through acquisitions, everyone is a little bit different. And you have to really look at that for what's the purpose of this acquisition? What are the urgent needs that we have for this business that we acquired? And then be able to develop the strategy for that. If we need to get them on board fast, that has to be a priority. If we need them on the same accounting system and they need to do their timesheets with us and, we need all those things, great. Make that number one priority. If we need the culture fit first, that's a whole different strategy that we need to take into place.
Totally makes sense. All right. So you talked about investment and where you spend your time. One of the areas you spend your time and heavily invest in, from Deltek's perspective, is our annual Clarity industry study. Without giving away too many of the findings, can you give us a little bit of a preview or, some of the signals you're seeing with this year's research?
Absolutely. So some of the things that we're seeing comes back to some of the topics that we're discussing now, right? So productivity and efficiency is threading through every part of the business. The profitability, the focus on thin margins, we're seeing that across the board. So while firms are still having a strong year financially, there's definitely some signs that firms are starting to be a little more cautious. They're seeing numbers of, forecast numbers a little bit lower, employee growth numbers a little bit lower. Some of those backlog numbers are softening quite a bit. And so what we're seeing in terms of those key themes is going back to really using data for management and decisions and coming back to that as the source, looking for those opportunities for technology, looking for AI has been a conversation for a long time.
For sure.
But we have to go beyond using it for meeting minutes and using it to rewrite my email. Really, where can it help me in that operational excellence and that operational efficiency in a way that can be meaningful to the client? So we're seeing some of that come through in the report as well, as we're seeing the number of firms. If we look at last year to this year and a little bit of the details, the number of firms that are starting to use AI now, that number went up tremendously this year, which is great to see.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
now it's how do we start to get those gains? How do we start to get the feedback from it? And I think with most years, we see the overall impact of economic uncertainty. Some of those factors we're really starting to see come through in the results too. So again, strong financial, but with the backlog softening, our forecasts are not as high as they have been in the past. And so I think firms are just settling in a little bit to a little bit of that new norm. And what does that look like? And where can we focus time and effort, whether it's upskilling, whether it's investing in our teams for training? We're seeing a lot more of that coming through the career planning, the development, those types of things. Firms are really starting to at least show signals that they're going to make those a priority. Now, execution is always something that we talk about when it comes to unveiling the results. So if we keep having the same things as our initiatives that we've had for the past 5 years, maybe we're not making it a priority. So there's some of that plays into it. But I really think that those data-driven decisions, the focus on the operational excellence and finding a way to use that for differentiation in the market is really a place where we're starting to see some signs in the Clarity data, but obviously a lot more to come as we bring forward the results.
So what date should our audience members put on their calendar for Clarity this year?
So we are looking at the second week of May to release the results this year. So that will be the starting point where they'll be able to access the report itself. We'll do our standard webinar where I will be there to unveil the results and you'll get to hear from me on some of those key trends. And then we'll also have a series of webinars throughout the summer that will focus on specific areas of the report. So if you're project managers and operational leaders, we'll have a session that's really relevant to them, different from the financial leaders and the business developers, so that we can dive in a little bit deeper on the metrics that matter to them, the themes, the trends, and have some more conversations around those. So beginning in May, we'll start to see that, but it will roll through the rest of the year and we'll continue to share all those great insights and details from the report.
And I know, 47 years of this report certainly says something about the value that it brings to project-based businesses. Before we wrap things up here, we've talked about investing in people, modernizing technology, and, really using data to, the decision-making process a little bit easier. What's one piece of advice, and sorry, I didn't prep you on this. What's one piece of advice you would give to leaders about leading confidently through this ambiguous stage that we're currently in?
So I think the one piece of advice that I would give is this isn't anything different. We've been through these highs and lows in this industry. It's always changing, it's always evolving. But having a strategy in place for agility and flexibility and really leaning on your leaders for information. So you can get information around the industry and talk to your peers and have those discussions. But the people that really can give you the greatest insight into where they're struggling are the people within your company. So the data can only tell part of the story. The data that you have should really then prompt conversations. And so if leaders aren't taking that next step, they're really missing out on some key opportunities to figure out what's happening behind the scenes. So if, for example, we have our utilization rates not where we need to be, well, what's the reason behind that? Rather than just saying, we need to get that number up. What's happening that made it where it is today? Are we seeing challenges? Are projects shifting? Our leaders, we have different staff and we're trying to get them up to speed. So really digging into the story behind the why and using your teams to really help fill out that story for you can create some incredible insight and give you some of those ideas of where can we have that efficiency? Where can we see that opportunity to really be more successful as a firm?
Well, thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And we really appreciate you being here live and in person in the Deltek studio.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.